welcome back to the Film Fund podcast. I'm your host, founder, and executive producer at the Film Fund, Thomas Verdi. I'm also an award-winning filmmaker, producer, and film festival judge. I started the Film Fund to give filmmakers an easier, alternative way to get their films funded. Instead of working on a screenplay, crowdfunding campaign, or grant application, you write one sentence pitching your film for a chance to receive up to $10,000 and other prizes to make it. Our summer 2022 narrative and documentary funding contests are now closed, so thank you everyone for entering. And we are, well, actually, I have to adjust my script here. We actually just announced the winners yesterday via our email newsletter, so congrats to them. Check us out at thefilmfund.co for more information. I want to remind listeners that contests do happen regularly, so if you are listening at a later date, check the website out for the most up-to-date information. Today we have a unique guest. We don't have a filmmaker or a producer, but we have Joshua Ehrig, who is a professor at Lehigh University, who is actually my professor at Lehigh University during my undergrad. He was in, I did some capstone courses with him, and then I also did an independent study with Professor Ehrig, Joshua, to flesh out the Film Fund before I took it into my master's program and expanded it there. I'm so used to calling him Josh, so we will go with Joshua.
Yeah, feel free to call whatever.
Okay, just off the cuff, yeah. Yeah, no, he's been there literally since day one. I had an idea for, in the first capstone course, we had to do a project, and it was like medical based. It was something in the healthcare industry, and I think it was a good idea, but it was just not what I was passionate about at all. It was how to find a surgeon if you were having a surgery. If you listen to the podcast, you know I've had a few spinal surgeries, so it was like very much in that time, and I was taking what I was going through in life and making it into a service-based business. And at the end of the semester, Josh goes, Tom, this is really great. You're going to give you the A or whatever, however we handle grades. He says, but how about next semester in the next capstone course, you do something you're actually interested in, something you're actually passionate about. And that really resonated with me because I'm like, you're right. I don't care about the healthcare industry so much. And it's really boring to me at times. So I was trying to raise money for a short film from a script that I wrote, Son of Blackbeard. I was like, okay, well, why don't I try to solve that problem, raising funding? So Josh has been there literally since day one, the inception of the Film Fund and the idea. He's been such a good resource to me, one of my early mentors, and I can't thank him enough for coming on the show. Professor Ehrig, could you give us some more info about you and your background?
Thanks for having me, Tom. So first, I think in the previous example, you spoke about the Launching Ventures course, and I think you learned about founder market fit pretty fast. Right. So, because I think for you, it was a problem that you dealt with, but it was not something you had any kind of domain expertise in. And I think it's hard for a lot of entrepreneurs. Right. So I think founder market fit is really, really important. But you always had the passion for what you're doing now with Film Fund, but also you have the talent, and plus there's a market need. And I think you have to have all three of them to really succeed. So kudos to you on that. So I'm a professor of practice at Lehigh University. I teach entrepreneurship, innovation, and strategy. And so I get the good fortune of working with folks like Tom every semester. So I think my job's pretty easy, quite frankly. And, and it's been kind of cool to see you kind of go from, you had a bunch of different ideas, and then you kind of said one day, hey, I'm going to try to democratize independent filmmaking. Right, because it's not super convenient to break in. It's not fairly accessible, right? And quite frankly, it takes a lot of time and resources. So how do I kind of open that up for everyone? And I think that's really your why, and I think that's really what makes this, a success that it is today.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the kind words. I would like working with myself too because I'm awesome. No, I'm just kidding. But talking about domain expertise and all the different types of students you work with in those capstone courses, is it a challenge, going from industry to industry? Like, I'm sure you see almost every industry and interest across the board. Like, are there industries that you see more common than others, or is there, like, how do you handle, I guess, applying that skill set that you have to different types of projects?
Yes.
We're talking about film, but then there's also, manufacturing or whatever you have.
Right. And all of them are equally great, right? So, but there's a few different things going on. And I think first is that a lot of folks, when they're younger, like, you don't know what you don't know, right? So in this case, I'm generally unconventional in my advice. So I recommend students actually, as an entrepreneurship professor, I recommend students actually do paid discovery. Go out there and learn on somebody else's dollar, understand what the real problems are, develop that kind of domain expertise, and then put two and two together and start building something at that point. And so I think that's kind of unconventional, but at the same time, I think it's what most people, most students, right, 21, 22, is exactly what they need. Uh,
Hmm.
a lot of folks in these courses also, they want to be entrepreneurial. They want to get the skill set and the mindset, but they don't necessarily want to like kind of go out there and make it happen right away, which is completely okay. Maybe they just want to be in the ecosystem. Maybe they want to apply the skills, the mindset to their existing organization. As I've said to you before, 20 years ago, I had a company while in undergrad, and I couldn't list it on my resume because I was viewed as a flight risk.
Hmm.
That was directly from career services at the time, which was great advice then. But now, if you don't do anything entrepreneurial, companies love it. They want to see it. And if you do a project, it helps you get a job. I can't tell you how many students in the capstone courses have been able to be successful in doing it. I would say only maybe like 5 or 10% of the students who actually take these courses, though, like yourself, actually like become real deal, right? Like they go out there and make
Hmm.
it happen. But I think, like life, I think entrepreneurship and life are kind of one journey, right? They're parallel with each other, and I think it's really important to kind of understand who you are, right, and what you're comfortable with, because there's two very different paths. One is about stability and security, and the other is about I don't want to say instability and insecurity, but if you do it right, most days it's going to feel like that.
Hmm. Yeah, totally. That's definitely great advice. Yeah, I mean, I definitely had to deal with the decision, like, do I list these projects on my resume when I'm applying for jobs? And it really depends. Like, if you're applying to a startup versus a big company, I've seen sometimes startups, I mean, depending on the industry, maybe like they don't want to see what you're working on sometimes. So like it depends.
Yeah. But you
At least I
learn
had
so
one company.
much, right? I
Yeah.
mean, this is why it's a flipped classroom. This is why it's about real life application. It's not about regurgitation, memorization, reading
Hmm.
from a textbook. And I think you probably learned a tremendous amount just in the past few years, more so than anything I could have probably taught you at this point in the classroom, right? I
Yeah.
mean, you got to learn by doing, right? And
Yep.
and if you're, and I kind of subscribe to, this is kind of a little controversial, but I really appreciate the quote, nobody cares, try harder, right? But it
Yeah, I
is
agree with
lonely.
that.
It is a very
Hmm.
lonely environment. And, and I think you just got to keep doing it. And I
Hmm.
think that prepares you for life and whatever you decide to do. Success is what you make of it.
Yeah, and what I always loved about your courses was that you give the students the freedom to learn, to do that discovery.
Yeah.
Like, okay, here's the basic framework for what you have to do. We need deliverables every week, but I need you to set those deliverables. I need you to figure out kind of what to do. Like you in the I forget the number of the course, but the first capstone course, you teach kind of the process of entrepreneurship, how to create something, how to start. And then the second course is like, all right, let's actually create something. Um, so I just thought that was always so cool. And we talk about film school versus doing it yourself a lot on the podcast. I haven't gone to film school. I was saying not yet, but I hate to rule anything out, but I don't think I'm going to go to film school at this point. But
Yeah, you never want to
it's
you
interesting.
never want to kind of cross everything off the list, right?
Yeah,
Like life
there's
works really weird ways.
exactly.
Yeah.
So there's a chance I might, but I think film school can be great because it can tell you like how to do it, but you're really not going to learn until you get on set. That's that everyone has said that who's come on the podcast, even if it's a set in film school. Film schools are great. They give you resources, they give you a community, they give you crew and talent right there. But you're not learning how to make a film in the classroom. You're learning how to make a film on set. So that's one parallel I think I've drawn right now on this podcast, just remembering your courses and the freedom that you gave me.
Yeah.
Like if I said I want to go on set to do discovery, you'd be like, great, go make it happen.
Yeah, figure it
Um,
out, right? So, but
yeah.
that kind of raises the question of like, what is the future of film school? Because I think about this a lot with higher ed.
Mhm.
What does the future of higher ed actually look like, right? Is it more application based, right? Is it more platform based? And I say this for both higher ed and film school as a whole, right? Like, because the way folks consume content is very different than when content was created in the traditional means of higher ed or film school, right? Content, professors used to be gatekeepers of scarce content. Now there's an overabundance of content, right? And I
Mhm.
almost feel like I'm less of a professor and more of a facilitator, of the noise, right?
Hmm.
And even with Gen Z, the first generally digital generation here, it's really interesting to see how they communicate with content, right? I mean, because it's all very short form content creation and dissemination. Like they've kind of
Hmm.
vertically integrated themselves, right, as
Yeah.
individuals. And then how does that look in terms of how we all view content in the future? We've generally done it as a mass consumption level, but I think it's going to be very individualized and personalized. And I think platforms like TikTok, you're already seeing that, but I think it's going to become a lot more mainstream
Hmm.
in the future. But to me, it also creates an opportunity because I think there's a disconnect between generations right now around that, around how they create and consume content.
Yeah, and it's changing. I mean, I don't necessarily want to say to day, but it kind of is. I mean, when I first started writing up the business model for FF Branded, I was doing research. That's our agency side of the
Yeah,
business, where we take members of the film fund community and create paid opportunities for them to work on set for other companies making branded videos. Everything I was reading was like, oh, long form. Companies want long form, branded content, branded entertainment, that you want to educate and entertain your audience. I mean, now it's like TikTok, short form, so we're doing these long form videos, we're cutting them down, and it's just constantly evolving. So, I mean, yeah, with film school, I think it's definitely going to depend on, you're still going to have your traditional movie making curriculum and all of that, but I think you're going to start seeing courses that are a lot more geared toward digital content creation,
yeah,
and this younger generation for sure, because they're growing up with, like, one of my friends, she's a little bit younger than me. She has like 11,000 TikTok followers.
yeah,
I'm just like, and she's making these videos. I'm like, why are you working in project management? Like,
yeah.
go leverage that.
Well, that's the
um,
disconnect I was talking about as well, because if you're 19, 20 years old and this is how you consume content, create content, communicate with folks, and then you have somebody at the front of class who doesn't understand that, right? I
mhm,
mean, I think it's a challenge, right? But I think it's a
yeah.
huge opportunity for higher ed, and quite frankly, it'll be really interesting to see whether they kind of take the baton and run with that or not. So, but I
Mhm,
also think there's a great opportunity to be a platform play where there's so much content generated, whether it's in class with you a few years ago or whether it's in a film school setting, that's never visible, right? And it never like fully promotes your personal brand as well as the brand of the film school or of the higher ed institution, right?
mhm,
And there is a residential experience, but I feel like you're leaving a lot off the table, right? For folks who maybe don't want the residential experience, but who are equally qualified. Uh,
mhm,
and maybe there's different kind of tiers in terms of access and so forth that kind of give you that experience, right? It's all about experience, whether you're doing a film. And I'm not a producer, like yourself, but if I was producing a film, right, it's all about the experience that the viewer has. But I don't think it's any different whether you're a student in a classroom going to the store down the street, or in film school. So I think it's become all about the experience. How do you differentiate yourself otherwise?
mhm. Yeah, great advice.
So I don't know. I think you have an opportunity there, quite frankly. I think if you're kind of trying to democratize independent filmmakers, I mean, perhaps there's an opportunity to democratize or film school or potentially
Yeah,
change the way it's done.
yeah. I mean, I was just, while you were saying all that, I was thinking of an idea for, maybe it could be a service we launch, like an at, and maybe schools do this, and maybe they ship equipment. I don't know, but kind of like an at-home film school package, where it's like kind of hybrid, where we create these environments in cities where people get to be on set and they get to learn hands-on. But it's remote. I don't know. Just thinking off the
And you're
cuff here,
doing a
but yeah, it's
built-in
definitely.
community as well. So you already have a
Mhm,
built-in community with the film fund. So that could be a natural extension. And you could have some
yeah.
key partnerships with folks within those communities that may be existing institutions that perhaps have the accreditation piece as well.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
So,
Definitely look at that. Before we started rolling, we were talking about something Joshua said to me, when I was a student. He
uh-oh.
said, "Tom, you're one of the things I think you have a challenge with is you're always trying to do four different projects at once." Um, and as you just listen to this conversation, where it's all over the place. We're talking about film school, we're talking about higher ed, TikTok, Gen Z, and one thing Joshua likes to talk about is intentional focus. Could you tell me a little bit about that term and what you mean by it?
Yeah, so like yourself, I like to go in all these different directions, and I think fairly recently, I think focus has always been something that's really important if you're going to build a company, but I also think in life, right? I mean, in entrepreneurship, you talk about limited time and resources as you search for your business model, get product market fit, whatever it might be. But I think in your personal life as well. One thing that I'm really into, and I've been doing this for probably about 10 years or so, is life design. And it became actually something cool during COVID, right? Because all of a sudden everyone's like, hey, life design actually might sound kind of important. And all I mean by that is simply that we, you know, generally we've let our business model dictate our life, not our life design dictate our business model. And so I kind of flip the script in that sense. And I think kind of learning about who you are and kind of being internal allows you to kind of get that focus, right? It would be great to play in all these different areas, but and it's that's that explorer mindset that we talk about. And if you have, I mean, I personally have ADHD, right? So I like to be in a lot of different places and think on a higher level all the time. But that being said, it doesn't necessarily help me, right? Because then, because I talked about before these three pillars of passion, skill set, and market need, right? Like, how do you develop domain expertise if you're kind of bouncing everywhere all the time? Or how do you truly cultivate your community if you're bouncing around all the time, right? Now, the discovery process might have you kind of, iterating, pivoting, whatever it might be. But at one point, you've got to have some kind of fit. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's not only professionally, but I think that's personally as well. And I think you have to have intention in doing that. And I think it's one thing to just keep exploring. I think it's another thing to create structure and accountability around that personal inner focus. And then how does that relate to your personal and professional life? I think maybe that just comes with experience and maturity. But it's a challenge, right? How do you create that structure and accountability? And I'd recommend, creating like a personal board or advisors or accountability partners to kind of put you down that path. But and intentional focus is also hard because uh, you got bills to pay, right? Like we
Yeah.
all have to pay the rent at the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
and so sometimes that reality makes it hard to truly hone in on what you want to focus on because building a business takes time. There's a right, like we talk about, a burn rate, right? Or, negative burn rate. And, like how long does that last, right? How much is your personal runway?
Mm-hmm.
And that's all really important. And so how do you keep it real paying rent, but also, have that focus?
And then can you define burn rate for some of
Yeah,
our
absolutely.
audience that might not know what that
Yeah.
is?
So burn rate, on a simple level is just how much money you're spending each month, right? So assuming you're bringing in no revenue, but your gross would just simply be how much money you're spending versus how much money you're bringing in. And generally, you're not bringing in a lot of money in the beginning, so maybe I'm bringing in $1,000, but I'm spending 10,000 a month. I'm losing 9,000. My burn rate is $9,000 a month, right? So if
Mm-hmm.
I only have 45,000, right, I better be calling somebody yesterday to raise more money, right? Because I only have five
Mm-hmm.
months of runway left.
Right.
So,
And
and
then what did you mean when you put that word native in front of it? Native burn rate.
I'm sorry, I said net versus gross. So
Oh, net.
yeah,
Okay.
one just factors in just expenses and one factors in
Gotcha. Gotcha.
revenue.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
But in the very beginning, especially if you're kind of in a B2C, a business to consumer market, chances are revenue may not be something that you're generating quite a bit of right from the start, or even
Mm-hmm.
B2B, right? You have a longer sales cycle at that point when you're just
Yeah.
dealing with businesses.
Yeah. And just thinking about intentional focus and really honing in on your project. I'm just thinking about that in kind of a professional sense and on a micro level in the film industry. Let's say you're a director and you're just kind of directing every project that gets thrown at you. Or you're going out and like, I'm going to do music videos, I'm going to do documentaries, I'm going to do horror films, I'm going to do family comedies. It's like at the end of the day, you kind of have to pick one. Like, yeah, that discovery process is super important so you can find out maybe what you're good at, what you like, what you want to spend your time doing. But if I go to a filmmaker's portfolio and they're across the board and I don't know what their sweet spot is, it's going to make it harder for me to really know how to hire them.
Yeah.
Now that's different if everything they do is amazing work and it shows they have a broad skill set. It's kind of two ways of looking at it, but I think there does need to be a focus there on, what do you want to be doing? Are you doing brand videos? Are you doing commercials? Or are you doing narrative? So I think even in the film industry, you need to get to a point, and this could be mid-career, right? Like, I'm not saying you need to pick something from day one and do it, but I think having a focus there, a trajectory, is super important, and it's something I struggle with too. I'm all over the board, and I have a few different brands I've kind of created for myself. I have the Film Fund, and then I have FF Branded. One is the film funding and the producing for independent shorts and now features in a month or so. That's the Film Fund, and then FF Branded is the branded stuff, and then TAV Films are my passion projects. I want to be a writer director who works in primarily black comedy, dark humor. So I've kind of segmented them, but to have them all under one like website, I don't think would work. So you need to, if you're not going to, there needs to be some kind of focus when you're even presenting them to the world, just like marketing it.
Yeah.
Like, okay, here's how I do it here. This is what I do here, and this is what I do here. If you try to do everything at once, it's just going to be, you know, what's a more professional word than cluster F? A mess.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting though. Like the worst advice, but the one I've kind of taken myself is, uh, my biggest successes have been because I didn't have a plan B or C, which is interesting, right? Because you try to de-risk things. It's just I just went all in on my plan A, and sometimes I mean, if you read a bunch of, if you read about other entrepreneurs and people that have kind of made it as well, and that's generally been the case actually, right? So you got to be honest about, what's your risk profile. You can de-risk a lot, right, through different processes and kind of lean startup principles and so forth. But at one point, you kind of have to put the chips in the middle and start playing. And that's hard, right? I mean, it's hard to start putting chips in the middle and start playing, but it's also good to know when to hold them and when to fold them, of course, too, right?
Yeah.
So,
No, it's
but
definitely, you do need to decide at some point, like, do I want to do this? Do I want to go all in with this? Like, when I did that when I quit my full-time job. I worked
yeah,
for a digital agency for about a year and a half out of college. Joshua actually recommended I try to get a job at a college instead of doing the film fund full time to de-risk
yeah.
and get some more
Can I
experience.
add to that real quick? We were
Yeah,
talking
totally.
about this beforehand. I'm a big fan of paid discovery at the end of the day, and simply what
Mm-hmm.
that means is go learn on somebody else's dollar, right? Go work for somebody, maybe it's in the industry, whatever it might be. Learn what their problems are, get domain expertise, and then take advantage of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of folks that will just say, well, I don't have a product or service, and I'm just going to go out there and build something. And it's like, well, what is the actual problem, right? And how are you going to pay rent? It's a kind of a
Mm-hmm.
theme here today, I guess, but it's important. And that would be something, even a challenge for yourself, is when if somebody comes up to you and says, I have this big consulting engagement, large company, and we're going to pay you, we're going to pay you a lot of money to do this consulting project. But so you're going to get a nice cash infusion, but at the same time, you're going to have to, not work on the core product as much. What do you do
Mm-hmm.
at that point?
Yeah.
Right? That might be
Is it?
rhetorical, of course, but
I was like, do I answer this now?
yeah,
Then I
right.
start
He's like,
thinking,
great,
do I
we're
outsource?
back in school. But that's an important question, right? And I've seen a
Mm-hmm.
lot of folks who've kind of taken that money and they kind of lost focus in terms of what they were actually trying to build.
Yeah.
And it's not, look, it's such a circumstantial situation. I don't think I can't just say, oh, they shouldn't have done that, right? I mean, I don't know their personal situation, but
Mm-hmm.
as much as you can have intentional focus and even bankroll, right, by doing that paid discovery. So because I notice most people don't have that risk profile, so to speak, to just make the jump, make the leap almost immediately. And
Mm-hmm.
I found that most people actually through a little bit of experience and paid discovery kind of learn what the problems are and make it happen from there.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, when I was working that job, I was living at home. I lucked out. The job was a 10-minute drive away from my parents' place.
Nice.
So I was working on the film fund while I was
Yeah.
working there. I didn't talk about it a lot. Boss knew I had it going
Yeah,
on,
and
but
you live
I did
rent
some
free
other
hopefully as
freelancing.
well, which is
Yeah.
I recommend anybody that can do that go do that and moonlight, right? Like
Yep.
so you work 9 to 5, and then if you still are working 6 to 12, 6 to 1, right? And we were just talking about life design, so there could be some
Mm-hmm.
irony there, but
Mm-hmm.
or hypocrisy depending on the definition. But uh, you know, then you'll see whether you really are in for it or not, whether you really love
Yeah.
it, and whether it's something you want to do. And it sounds like that's actually what you did.
Yeah, I mean, I was even doing that over the God, when was this? Around this time last year, I was managing a studio in Germantown, part of Philadelphia. Cinematographer I work with. He's been on the podcast actually, William DeJessa.
Nice.
He is a part owner at Rittenhouse Filmworks, and they needed a manager. Um, and FF Branded wasn't a full on project at the time because it was a pandemic. Productions just weren't happening. We were still doing the film fund, but I had this opportunity where I was like, I have a bunch of free time on my hands. Like, yeah, why not? I'll moonlight and do the studio job, and I'll run the film fund at the same time. He was flexible with it. So then you have an opportunity to have two incomes for a bit. Now that wasn't a long term gig for me,
Yeah.
but if you're starting out and like you're building something, paying rent is super important, like we talked about. So designing your life where you can be like when I was starting the film fund, I wasn't making any money at all, but I was waking up at 5 a.m., working for 2 hours, and then going into work,
Yeah.
you know, for the 9 to 5. So definitely, you kind of, but it comes to a point where it's like, okay, how long is this? Like, that's not sustainable. I don't think you can work two full-time jobs
Yeah.
long term.
Right.
And
Right.
neither of those things were when I was starting out with the film fund, working at the agency, or even last year when I was working at the studio and trying to grow um, what I call Discontent Media Group, which is the parent company that owns the film fund and FF Branded. Long term, that just wasn't going to work. So you have to be intentional, and you have to decide like, okay, what am I going to work on?
Yeah, and
And
there's
where
no
am I going to spend my
substitute for
time?
hard work, right? So I think since like Tim Ferriss with the 4 hour work week 15 years ago, right? And everyone's like, oh, I only have to work 4 hours. Or you hear about this influencer who's they spend 2 hours a week, or this traveler or whatever doing work. And
Mm-hmm.
but what they don't tell you is all the work that they put in prior to getting to that point, right? And then
Yeah.
all the work they have to put in to stay relevant, given how
Mm-hmm.
fast technology is changing, and customer preference, adoption rates are changing as well.
Mm-hmm. Have you read the 4 Hour Work Week? I
I
haven't,
did
but that's
15 years ago, or
yeah.
whenever. It's been probably about that long now. I'm losing touch with my ears, unfortunately. But that kind of, so that kind of got things going in terms of like, oh well, we could all just kind of automate X, Y, and Z and not have
Mm-hmm.
to work a lot, right? And the reality is that like if you're not busy, you're bored, right? And that doesn't sound like a fun life. I'm
No.
a big fan of having like a continuous flow state where I'm doing stuff that it's challenging, but I'm totally engaged, locked in on. It's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
playing pickup basketball with some friends, right? And hopefully they're good, right? So that they're challenging in that sense, and but at the same time, like you're working your butt off, like it's intense, it's grueling, but time flies,
Yeah.
right? And that's, I try to lock in on that flow state in everything that I do, and that kind of goes into the whole intentional focus as well.
Do
So
you have any
because
tips on
yeah,
getting to that flow state? Like, let's say you're having, I don't know, you want to work, maybe you're having a bad day, you're just kind of down, or you're not feeling productive.
yeah,
How do you get into that
go
flow
work
state?
out for 20 minutes.
Good
Go
tip.
do some push-ups, right?
Do
Go
something
run on the
active. Yeah.
treadmill. Right? Those bed sheets are comfortable, right? You could decide just to go take a nap, or you could decide to go run the treadmill for 10 minutes, and
Yeah.
you're going to feel energetic,
Yeah. You're gonna have those endorphins
right?
going,
And
and
then you're going to be
maybe
thinking as
want to
well.
work on your screenplay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I think exercise, both mentally, right, and physically, is really important. And
Mm-hmm.
whether that's just doing meditation, right, kind of getting rid of the distractions. That's something I talk a lot about with not only students, with executives as well, as around cell phone usage.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do you wake up every morning with all these notifications, and do you respond to them right away?
Yeah.
And
Did I tell
then,
you about my journey with the light phone?
no, I don't think so, but I'll have to hear it.
So, do you know about the light phone? Have you heard of that before?
I've heard of it, yes.
So I had it. For those who don't know, it's a phone that really doesn't have any apps on it.
Yeah.
They call them tools. You can send texts, make phone calls. It has a GPS. Full disclosure, though, the GPS does not work. At least mine did not work very well. It only has a couple of tools, and I did it for 6 months. But I realized like I still had my iPhone with me for Uber and everything like that. So I don't think it's quite there yet. But
Right. Well, and
it was
there's
it was it gave me an appreciation for technology. Like I'm definitely having gone through that experience,
Yeah.
I'm on my phone less now.
Yeah, and I'm not saying become a Luddite, right? In that
Mm-hmm.
sense, I'm more or less saying, like own the first 15 minutes of your life every morning, right? Like don't let kind of external stimuli kind of hit you immediately, because then you're in like a reactive mode almost right from the start.
Mm-hmm.
What I like to do is wake up, work out, first thing, and kind of get myself in a good place, and then kind of open myself up to the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really helpful. And if you have to do that at 4:30 in the morning or at 6 or 7, depending on your circumstance, then that's what you have to do. But
Mm-hmm.
but I think you got to look internally first, and not only be okay with the person that you are, but own it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really really important. I don't think a lot of people do that. I challenge folks. So I'm a fan of Carl Newport and digital minimalism and so forth. And like put the phone in a different room,
Yeah.
right? Like use a conventional alarm clock.
Mm-hmm.
Like people are too afraid of being bored, and it's a really
Yeah.
interesting kind of situation we have today. Now I don't want to sound like an old man, of course, but because I'm sure I am sounding like one at the moment. But you know, I once had like a group of folks just try to meditate for 4 minutes, just be in silence. And maybe it's not even
Mm-hmm.
meditation, but, and I can tell you, like, people were like getting nervous because they were like, oh my God, like,
Wow.
what do I do? Like, I got to get my phone here and do something
Yeah.
immediately.
People are so programmed to be glued to the content,
Yeah.
and whether that content is video and film, which we all love creating, or if it's you know little red icons popping out of a Facebook notification. Unfortunately, I think most of the time it's the latter.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that's really important for creating quality content too. It's like detoxing from all of the noise
Yeah.
and getting to that quiet space. Like, okay, I'm going to sit down and now I'm gonna create something. Because if your mind is totally um, just bombarded with nonsense all the time from your device, you're not going to have any like mental energy left to create something.
Right.
So I think it's life balance, like you're saying too, but it's also like you need to free up your mind too to be able to create something
And
important.
that's why I said run on the treadmill for 10 minutes. You'll get more of a genuine dopamine hit than you would by, scrolling through your Instagram feed.
Yeah.
And I'm not, once again, I think there's a place for all this. And I'm not, I do think social media is a dangerous kind of situation for a lot of folks, younger folks, from
Mm-hmm.
an anxiety, depression aspect, right? Because I don't think it's realistic. But that being said, I don't think you should define your life by how many likes you get. I think you should
Yeah.
define your life by your inner purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm guilty of that too. Like I posted a trailer for one of my passion projects, short film I just am working on submitting to festivals now, the Toms, and I was just like, I was looking at the post and oh my god, I'm getting more likes. I'm getting more likes. Like
Yeah.
this is awesome. People like what I'm putting out there. So it's as a creator, it's tough to balance that too
Yeah.
because like you're creating to resonate with people at the end of the day. People want to watch your films. That's why you're doing what you're doing. But
And it's all about
th-
distribution for you as a
yeah.
filmmaker, right? I'm pretty sure producing, it's not the product, it's the distribution, right? And I'm
Mm-hmm.
pretty sure that mirrors films as well.
Yeah, yeah. If you make an amazing film and nobody sees it, there's no point.
Right,
So
right. So there is a
that's
reality to understanding all this for business
mm,
purposes, right? But I'm kind of separating the personal and the
yeah,
business.
and that's important.
But for some, the personal is the brand, which is the business, right?
Yeah,
Without
that's
mentioning, certain influencers.
sure, sure, and that's got to be I don't know, just a difficult lifestyle to maintain. I don't think I would want every second of my day to be documented
Yeah,
and distributed.
yeah.
And I don't know how genuine some of those influencers are anyway. But assuming that is their real life,
Well,
I don't know.
the first kind of mainstream person to do that was Justin Kahn with Justin.tv. And
Mm.
you may have not heard of Justin.tv, but you heard of the company it became, which was Twitch, which was sold to
Oh, okay.
Amazon
I
for
actually
$1
don't know
billion.
that story.
Yeah, yeah. So I would totally check that out.
Okay.
Where he pretty much like just put a webcam on him and he just streamed his life 24 hours a day. And they found
Wow.
that, as they kind of went through the process and just had fun, they learned that people loved watching other people stream video games, right? Like,
Hmm.
who would have known that?
Yeah.
And that's kind of like one of the big things about you just kind of have to put yourself out there and
Hmm.
you have to be okay with like failing,
Yeah.
right? I think so Peter Thiel, who I'm not going to get into like politics about him because it's whatever, right? In terms of what people believe or not believe, but just solely as like an entrepreneur slash investor, he always talks about like what is your secret, like what is something that you fundamentally know that a lot of other folks would disagree with you on, right? And because if you want to create a valuable company, you have to have a secret. Because otherwise, there's a lot of people out there already doing it that have a lot more time and resources, right?
Hmm.
But secrets are hard because you don't want to be wrong, right? People have a fear of being wrong, but you can't fundamentally have a secret if you're not okay with being wrong, right? Because
Hmm.
people try to avoid the awkwardness of being wrong and so forth.
Yeah, you have to fail. You have to
Yeah.
try things. I mean,
So you've got to be
the film.
okay with being wrong, right? And I'm not
Yeah.
saying you should try to fail, right? Because I think
Right.
that also gets kind of conflated sometimes too,
Hmm.
right? Where it's like we have this like culture of failing, and I'm like, well, I'm not here to fail whatsoever, right? It's
Right.
just going to be an inevitable part of the process.
It's just gonna
It's
happen.
going to
Yeah.
happen every
I
day of your life, whether you build a
mhm.
company or not.
Yeah. And when I made my first short film, it was terrible. I didn't set out saying I'm going to make a terrible film so I can learn. No, it just
Right.
happened. I was right out of high school, didn't have any film classes ever, no production classes. I put my friends in it from high school, and it was terrible. Like there was no lighting, there was no I mean there was a script, but it was just bad. But I learned being on set, even though the set was me running around with a DSLR
Hmm.
on like winter break between semesters. I learned so much. So like you have to go into it with that drive and with that inspiration, really, like, okay, I'm gonna create something awesome, and then it might suck, but you're gonna have learned so much by doing that, and whether that's creating a company or creating a film. That's a really nice intro for my next question for you.
Yeah.
Do you see any parallels between independent film producing and entrepreneurship?
Yeah. So with independent film, so I mean, everything that we've talked about so far really it kind of aligns with that, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's interesting because you've got it. We talked about failure, but there's also a paradox of success as well. So in this case, the paradox of success is you've kind of gone down that learning curve. You've failed a bunch of times. You're now succeeding, right? You get comfortable, and with comfort becomes complacent. So how do you get yourself back to being uncomfortable, to not being complacent? Right? To being okay with failing again, because you've got to be able to change and evolve over time, right? Like
Hmm.
it doesn't like once you hit product market fit or once you hit your first 1,000 true fans or whatever it might be, the game's not over. And that's the thing is like you produce something that's successful, right? Like what's next, right? And how do you follow that up, or don't you? Right? And so I guess my point is you've got to be able to evolve, but you have to find comfort in the discomfort at every stage.
Hmm.
Because I feel like it's easy to say, well, I had that success, now I can be comfortable, or I'm in the classroom, I'll just do what's worked every semester, right? And it's like no, I mean, if I could find a way to, for lack of better words, cannibalize myself and my position, I would,
Hmm.
right? Because change is inevitably going to happen, right? Like you're on your phone using Snapchat and TikTok today, your grandkids one day are going to laugh at you as if it was the most archaic like
Yeah. Talking
technology
about
and
eight
process.
tracks and
Right. It's going to be the equivalent of 8 tracks one day,
hmm
and but people don't see that, right? They just see what's like right in front of them.
right.
Um, so I think that ability to evolve, kind of iterate and pivot throughout the process and not get complacent, I think is something that's important regardless of whether you're going into filmmaking or entrepreneurship. But I also think it's a parallel with life. I think you've got to have that in life as well. Now, if
Hmm.
your goal is just to be totally comfortable and just kind of enjoy life and not have to work, right? Like this is probably not for you. And that's okay, right? Like I don't judge other people in terms of like what they want to do because I think success has a different definition for all of us. I once, I once had a conversation with my grandfather who didn't even who dropped out in 10th grade, right? And he was like, Joshua, you've done so many like really great things. I could never I could never be what you are, right? And I looked at him and I started laughing and I said, you built your own house, you never had a mortgage, you've lived with this really awesome woman, my grandmother, bias, right, for over 50 years, right? And you never had debt. right? And you've had great health. In fact, he's in his 90s now, and you
Oh
know,
well,
and
good for
he's
him.
still kicking, awesomely, right? Like I was like, that's success. I was like, if I can get to that point, like that would be
Yeah.
fantastic,
Mm.
right? And so you've got to understand. So I think it really becomes internal. I think you have to understand what success is for you, and not what success is externally, like how other
Yeah.
people view. Because my advice is, I truly don't, nobody cares, right? I truly don't believe anybody cares. And not to be insensitive, or to take an insensitive stance, but I don't believe people are constantly thinking about you, right?
Mm.
When you're young, you always think, well, what do people think about this or that or what I do? But people have their own problems, their own insecurities, and
Mm.
adults are just big kids, right? I mean, that doesn't fundamentally change. Like
Right.
the context of the problems evolves, right, over time. And things that get you excited, right, over time, like going to a party when you're young versus getting that Dyson, vacuum cleaner, change, right? It just depends on the context and where you're at.
Mm.
That may or may not be a true story in my life, personally. I'm giving a shout out to Dyson,
Yeah.
so I think it's really important, and I'm unapologetic about stressing, like self love and who you are, and then projecting that to the rest of the world, and not letting the rest of the world kind of project that and define who you are, right?
Mm.
And you got to look in that mirror each and every night and like what you see,
Yeah.
and
And
I
if you're
think
looking at success in terms of money or status, someone said to me once, nobody wants to be the richest man in the cemetery.
right.
Like,
Well, but for some people that's what they want, and that's okay,
yeah.
right? Like I don't. It's kind of like teaching an entrepreneurship class. It's that some of you are going to be entrepreneurs now, later, or never. I was like, and all
Mm.
three of them are completely okay. You have to be honest about what you want,
Mm.
right? But be flexible to make changes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think change is super important too.
Oh yeah,
Your as a business, your business. This is something from my grad program. I don't think he's been on the podcast yet. We're trying to schedule him. Mark DeVink.
yeah. I know her. Yep.
He uh, he told me
He
something
left
once. He was
actually.
like,
He's
yeah, he's no
he's
longer.
out there doing
He's
it
doing his
too.
own thing,
Yeah,
doing LEDs and manufacturing some
yeah,
crazy stuff. Hopefully we'll have him on soon. But he said something. He was like, I think it was him anyway. I hope I'm not misattributing this. But anyway, he's like, you write your business plan, then as soon as you write that business plan, it's out of date because
yeah.
everything's just going to change.
Yeah, or like the Mike Tyson quote, right? Like everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, I love that.
yeah, I'm not a big fan of writing business plans, quite frankly. I don't have my students do. I mean, you know that. I just do like
Yeah,
a
no, I've.
small deck, and then how are you executing,
Mm-hmm,
right? I'm not an idea judge. I don't know if an idea is good or bad. I would have thought, with respect to like Build a Bear or Snapchat, I would have thought their initial use cases weren't all that great,
mm-hmm,
but it doesn't matter what I think. It matters what the market thinks and how you execute on it. And that's why,
yeah.
the only way to truly learn is by doing. And that's kind of why I view myself as more of a facilitator, whether it was with you or with my current students.
Mm.
And
Yeah, and
so,
I love that approach. Because there's just so much, there's so many resources out there now, but there's so much noise too. Like you said, it's like, how
yeah,
do I know if this blog I'm reading is legit or if it's someone who has no idea what they're talking about?
yeah. But
So
that's also
having
an
someone who,
advantage too, right? Because there's so much great thought leadership out there,
mm,
whether it's in venture capital or entrepreneurship or even in filmmaking, right? There's so much great, like there are really respectable organizations creating really great thought leadership pieces that kind of
mm,
merge the conceptual and the practical. And that's quite frankly where you want to be. I don't think at the end of the day there are certain processes and formulas that you can kind of learn from and take, whether it's filmmaking or entrepreneurship. But ultimately, there is no like, yeah, there's this. It's a long multivariate equation, but the variables change, right?
mm,
So I don't think there is a one, like a one formula or one process that will define success for you as an entrepreneur or as a filmmaker. And quite frankly, you may be redefining how it's done, right? Because that's inevitably
mm.
going to happen as well. And if you're kind of imitating or copying what's worked before, you're probably not innovating.
Yeah, and the circumstances are definitely going to be different for you going through something now than they were for that person that you're trying to
Yeah,
emulate. So it's all different. It's all changing.
yeah,
Just thinking about decks that you were talking about and pitching.
yeah,
Just got a couple questions left. If someone's trying to start a project, whether it's a business or a creative project, do you think it's better for them to try and raise money from somewhere else or use the resources they might already have available.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of validated learning because whether you have an idea or whether it's for a film or whatever it might be, you have a lot of assumptions, right, around your
Mm-hmm.
business model or around whatever it might be. And the best way to approach that is to do validated learning around like how do you validate those assumptions in like a time and cost efficient manner. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I'm not necessarily a big fan, especially given all the tools out there and the ability to get. I mean, we talked about this before. Like, you know, folks that have tens of thousands of followers on TikTok, right? And it's,
Mm-hmm.
uh, there's so many ways to kind of get like an audience, a community, almost right from the start at this point, right? Like, put something out there,
Yeah.
right? Like there's no substitute for that. I'm not a big fan of like going out and trying to raise a ton of money unless you validate some certain assumptions and you're able to like substantiate what your game plan is, or
Mm-hmm.
you're able to have a more intelligent conversation about it, right? Because that's OPM, which is other people's money at that point.
Right.
Which other
Mm-hmm.
people's money sounds great in theory, right? It's like it's not yours. You can, it seems like no risk, but it's a huge responsibility,
Yeah.
and you want to take that responsibility seriously, and obviously they want to return.
Yeah.
Or unless it's like a nonprofit situation, of course, but they want some kind of tangible or intangible return, most
Mm-hmm.
likely tangible, right? And it is a bigger responsibility. If you haven't done your homework, if you haven't prepared, why are you taking their money,
Yeah.
right? Would you
Absolutely.
would you put would you go sink all of your money into it? If the answer is no, but you're willing to take somebody else's, I think you need to take a step back.
Yeah. And that's a big part of what I built into the film fund because,
Yeah,
obviously my methodology comes from, I mean, my life and my experiences, but also what I learned in the classroom with you. And we talked about the MVP
yeah,
process,
minimum
which I'll
viable
talk about.
product.
Yep. Talk about a lot on the podcast here. And I relate it to film. It's like, okay, entering the film fund, entering a one sentence pitch is kind of like an MVP for your project, whether that's for your short film itself or for a bigger feature
Yeah,
film. Like, tell me your film idea in a sentence. Okay, let's validate that. Like,
yeah.
if it wins the film fund, okay, you might have something there.
Well, that's what I love
Um,
about it, right? Because you reduce the friction to get people to
mhm,
get started, right? So it's more of like a concierge MVP where you're actually not really doing anything, right?
yeah,
You're doing all like the work yourself, but you're not actually building anything,
mhm,
right?
yeah,
And I think that's great because now you have people that are putting a point on the board. They're actually getting on the field, and they thought it was impossible to get on the field
yeah.
before because
I'll have people email me and they'll say, like, all our process, is some when our judges evaluate all the sentences and we decide on the winners, we contact them. I had some winners, more than one, will say, "Oh, great, could you tell me which was my winning idea?" Because I entered 10, and I just
yeah,
wanted to see which ones would maybe be good. Um, and so it's like people are they're trying to validate their ideas, and there's it's a low cost, so they're not investing a ton of money, but they're able to kind of test, okay, like, is this worth putting more resources in, like, and there's a feedback service we offer now too, so if they get feedback and says this needs a ton of work, or this isn't really hitting, versus this is really good, this is really well put together, I think there's something here, they're kind of already doing their homework before, like you said, investing that capital, be it, or maybe even just time in developing the project further. So I'm a huge fan of validating assumptions and trying to test them,
yeah.
and I built that into the film fund,
But then
which I'm
one of the
super excited
byproducts
about.
of that I think resonates with your why with Film Fund is around empowerment,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you're empowering people. And I think that's really, really strong. And the more empowered your community is, the stronger it will be, the more you can leverage network effects, et cetera. So I'm actually curious, like if you've seen what how you've been able to potentially leverage network effects, even with the film fund, and what that looks like in the future. Because I imagine, creating a community around empowerment, right? And where, you can start out without engaging in the amount of time and resources that traditionally was viewed that way,
Mm-hmm.
can be pretty powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I have a great example of that. I'm so glad you asked. We have some of our previous winners, and they didn't win the main prize. There's a company in Philadelphia we have a relationship with. Sometimes they sponsor an equipment rental prize, Expressway Cinema Rentals. So they'll sponsor like a 2-day rental kit, camera, lighting. Is there lighting? No, camera and lenses. Excuse me. Yeah, it's usually a Blackmagic Ursa Mini G2 for the gearheads out there, and a set of RE Prime lenses, which is an amazing setup. Like, definitely worth if you were to rent that, it would be, at least 1,000, I would say.
Hmm.
Don't quote me on that. But anyway, we had these two filmmakers win that prize. And then they then submitted to one of our branded projects for one of our clients, Work Bistro. We're actually shooting on Saturday.
Yeah.
And their pitch was so good, I think, because they had the confidence of just coming off that win of the Film Fund prize. And they were like, I'm going to submit to this too. And so we empowered them to kind of, you know, pick themselves up by their bootstraps and go forward and be like, I'm a producer now, I'm going to produce a project. And they're doing a great job. I've been talking with them all through pre-production. We're ready to shoot on Saturday. And it was just a great way for them to get their name out there. Scott and Sarah Narr, married couple out in LA.
That's great.
So yeah, it's super exciting to see this community
Yeah.
growing.
And that's where the visibility aspect comes in, right? Because it's all about visibility. So you're not only providing that empowerment, but you're creating that visibility for the audience as well. So has there been? I don't want to flip the interview by any means, but I am curious. Has there been any kind of like, you had these baseline assumptions with the film fund back in the day. Has there been kind of like things that have like totally caught you by surprise, or like it's like, wow, I actually never thought about that, or things that have kind of developed within the community that perhaps you never thought would have ever happened, but happened, that became almost like inflection points in terms of where you want to take your business model kind of moving forward, and as you kind of develop more scale and scope?
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely surprised by people wanting. So, like I said a few minutes ago, we have a feedback service now that came out of people wanting feedback on their sentences.
Mm.
Like, I never would have, like, if when I was first starting the film fund, I wanted to make it my secret, so to speak, I guess, to tell is, I think everything should be as simple as possible.
Mm.
And that's kind of what I've built the film fund on. The processes, when I went and worked for that other company, I thought their processes were very complicated and convoluted. So I always want to, keep it simple, stupid, right? So thinking about that from day one, it's like, we don't, it's feedback coverage of something on scripts, but I was surprised people want feedback on their sentence entries, and it's actually something you can do. There's a lot. I was surprised by how much detail people can pack into these one sentence pitches. Like when we have previous winners on the podcast and we go through their winning sentences,
That's
I
an
go
art,
into
by the
like,
way. That's
oh
an art
yeah,
to be able to do that.
it's crazy. Like there are certain
Yeah.
action words I never would have
Yeah.
like thought to put in a pitch. Like you just so much emotion and so much conflict and so much storytelling power from certain words, whether it's like, forced or, just vegan, or just like so many words with certain connotations to them. Triumphed, just like very powerful action words. And
Yeah.
like we're able to write a few paragraphs of feedback based on just a one sentence pitch. So that definitely surprised me. And that was kind of, I guess, a natural product development because we're getting that demand for it. Like, okay, we'll launch a feedback service. It's what people want. And just, I was surprised at how many entries we got too.
Yeah.
Like kind of from the beginning. I saw a copycat out there the other day on online, just trying to, I don't want to say rip off the idea, but it was pretty much trying to rip off the idea. And their website, the links didn't work and things like that.
Yeah.
But
You're gonna have that. I mean,
yeah, no, I knew that was one of my
success.
yeah, like what I'm doing with the film fund isn't patentable, so I've always waited for that. But where was I going with that? Oh, you could just tell like they didn't have a community behind them.
Mm.
They weren't putting anything valuable out. And one thing that's also really surprised me is the community aspect. Like I didn't start the film fund thinking, oh, we'll have this amazing community. Like I knew I wanted it to be like community driven with the funding. Actually, the first idea was to have a lottery, but then I
Yeah, I
realized
remember
that was
that. I
illegal.
remember you were. I remember some
Yeah.
talks with some lawyers around that. So.
Yeah. You're like, yeah,
So
you can't do that. I found
that,
one loophole where if I bought a bar, I could run a lottery through the
right,
bar somehow.
right.
But
I,
I
I
was like, I'm
think I
not buying a
think
bar.
I think we decided to maybe kind of pivot from that.
Yes, we
So,
definitely pivoted there. But just how engaged the community has been. Like we created a Discord server, that's very active. We have people sharing stills from the projects, and these are people who are not even winning. Because at the end of the day, I would say the major flaw with the film fund is, unfortunately, it's a contest, and not everyone can win.
yeah.
But you can still join that community, and the community is something that really surprised me too. Like how just excited people are to be there and to talk with other like-minded people.
Yeah, and then a big thing is once you have that community, how do you leverage it in really healthy ways to understand? How do you create continuous feedback loops to understand where does the film fund go from here, right? Because it's
Mm-hmm.
like you're like at you're heading it, right? You're leading it, but without them, right? The film fund is nothing, right?
Yeah,
And
I got
so
nothing. I'm not sitting on a huge fund. Sometimes people think like, oh, the film
yeah.
fund, like we have
Well, I don't
a
mean it in
million
that
dollars and
respect. I just mean in terms of like the community is what's going to ultimately make the film fund beyond what it is today.
oh
And
yeah,
what is
that's
the
yeah.
community actually, what do they want? What do they need? And how's the film fund, provide that,
Mm-hmm.
the solution to those wants and needs. And you know, and I don't know, I think, there's a lot of folks that have, solutions in search of problems. You kind of had a problem in search of a solution, and I think that might have been a lot easier for you to actually develop this community right from the start.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, hey, I just want to create a lottery, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what's the problem I'm trying to solve, right?
Yeah.
Which might be a little bit more challenging at that point. So
Yeah, and
so
that's what I always start with, which that's what I was taught by you
hmm,
and by all my entrepreneurship professors. Really, like, what's the problem you're trying to solve?
yeah,
That's where you got to start.
yeah. But the fact that you're out there doing it, I think honestly, you're probably learning more than a classroom could teach you at this point. There's
Yeah,
no doubt
no,
about it.
definitely. But that foundation is definitely important. So I want to thank you
No, I
for providing
appreciate
that
that.
for sure.
Well, it's folks like you and other students that make it easier. I mean, I've had a ton of students like yourself kind of go out there and they're actively either building companies, have sold companies, Forbes 30 under 30, or they're venture capitalists or real players in the ecosystem now. And honestly, I just got to be a lucky spectator in it all because I think all of you are like extremely talented to begin with. Uh, you know,
Thank you.
the one thing that I notice with a lot of folks that initially come in though is that they say they want to be the boss. Like, why do you want to be an entrepreneur? Like, well, I want to be my own boss, and I kind of laugh inside a little bit when I hear that because yeah, I don't think you're ever fundamentally the boss in life, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
everyone wants to be the boss until they're the boss, and then you realize
Yeah.
like this is not fun. Whether it's whether you're like you have people's livelihoods at stake that you got to like
Mm-hmm.
make sure like everyone's okay. But just even in life, right? Like if it's not your parents, right? It's your employer, or it's your spouse or your partner,
Yep.
or
And then there's some.
one day your kids when you can't take care of yourself anymore.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
so I think that's actually a misconception at the end of the day. But
Yeah. Definitely.
but I'll be interested. I've been able to be a spectator for years now, and I get to I get to read the emails and occasionally update with you and so forth. I'm going to be really curious to see where you take the film fund kind of moving forward, and how do you further empower the community, and and how does that kind of merge with your personal why at the end of the day, and
Mm-hmm.
become the person you are and kind of evolve as a result.
Yeah, definitely all interesting things. So stay tuned to the podcast and the
That's
email.
right.
We are coming up on an hour, so we got to wrap up. We got one last question for
Sure.
you. What is next for you in the next year or so?
Yeah, that's a big question. I always ask folks that I have guest speak. I've had you in as well. If you were 20, if you were 21, 22, like what would be the one thing you advise everyone in the classroom right now based off your experiences? So this is a really really interesting time. If I were to say optimally, it would be to have that intentional focus. I'm involved in a ton of different courses, a ton of different programs, advise on a lot of different levels. But where's that intentional focus lie for me? I don't, it's fun to kind of play in a lot of different places, but you get to a point where you don't have the time, the resources to kind of make that happen. So I think it's kind of been a personal challenge.
Mm-hmm.
On a health note, at the beginning of the summer, I gave up all caffeine altogether,
Oh wow.
and which is it could be an entirely different conversation all of it in of
Sure.
itself. But I end up dropping like 20 pounds almost, not overnight, of course, but during the summer. So I think it's
Wow.
about just getting even better health too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and just surrounding myself with folks that kind of inspire and motivate, right? Whether it's you or you know somebody who's older, right? I'm always asking folks that are older than me, like, well, you know, like what were things that you thought you should have done better at my age or whatever it might be. When you're young, you don't think the old folks know what they're talking about. And then when you get
Mm-hmm.
older, you're like, wait a minute, maybe some of those old folks actually knew a thing or two. Right.
Yeah.
And you know, and that comes with age as well.
Mm-hmm.
So somewhat of an ambiguous answer, but you know, at the same time, I'm really interested in where higher ed's going, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have a tough love approach in the classroom. I hope I can keep that up. We saw with undergrads, the value propositions become about the residential experience, and grad students, it's become about convenience. So students are, you know, this is maybe shocking, Tom, but students are actively thanking me after every class, right? Because it's like there's some gratitude going on there and so forth. And
Mm-hmm.
but I think we have a lot of work to do. I think you know there's you know there's a little comfort going on, and you know, and I think that's got to change. And I think it's got to start with me and everybody who's in that classroom, kind of representing those students, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, they have expectations, and they should, you know, they should, right? I mean, college isn't cheap, and that, you know,
Yeah.
once again, that goes into a lot of other things, right? So, um, but you know, once again, if I'm not grounded, if I'm not healthy, if I'm not whole, you know, internally, then I can't provide that to my students. I can't
Mm-hmm.
provide that in my relationships. I can't provide it at home here,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, or in other endeavors that I might pursue.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's why I have a lot of respect for you, because you're like, hey, this is my passion. This is something I'm really hardcore serious about. And you know what? There's a lot of other paths you could take right now. And you're like, and a lot of them might be easier. They might
Mm-hmm.
be, you know, financially in the short term better. But you're like, no, this is where I'm going. And
Yeah.
quite frankly, like, that's respect right there,
Thank you.
because that's not easy to do. It's easy to talk that game,
Mm-hmm.
right? Anybody's a Monday morning quarterback, but when you're
Yeah.
actually playing the game, it's hard, right? And I'm sure you could, I'm sure we could spend an hour just talking about all those things that you deal with, right? Or that
Mm-hmm.
I've dealt with. And, you know, so a
Yeah.
lot of respect to you, and really to all the folks in your community who are actively trying. I mean, being an independent filmmaker, I mean, I've not gone down that path, but it's hard, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
It's not easy.
I've seen you, you know, I've had another student that was interested as well, you know, in terms of actually producing, and it is really, really hard. I mean,
Yep.
there's barriers to entry, right? You know, significant barriers to entry, not only beyond time and resources, you know, visibility, you know, it's just there's so many different layers to this. So the fact that there's folks that are putting themselves out there, right, on your platform and saying, "Hey, I'm okay if I'm completely wrong," like that's where you need to be. That's where you got.
Yep.
That's where you get started. And quite frankly, you're gonna have other people that are gonna someday watch your film and be like, "Hey, I had that idea.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. A lot of people did, but that was the person who
There's
actually
that execution.
executed on
Yeah.
it."
And that's the one of the most exciting things. Also, thank you so much for the kind words about me and the platform and the community. Definitely, the respect goes both ways. Wouldn't be here without the guidance you offered me early on. Um, but yeah, that one of the most exciting things is seeing these pitches. You know, I go through every entry we receive, and it's just so exciting to like see like, wow, people have some interesting ideas out there. They're not afraid to get them across. Excuse me. So it's definitely our community is really, really exciting, and I'm excited to see where we can take it.
All
Well,
right.
Joshua, and again, thank you so much for taking the time to speak. We are over the hour limit that I try to speak to. I had a feeling, or that I try to stick to. I had a feeling that would happen based on our
It's a
previous
professor
conversations. But
professor thing, Tom.
yeah, thank you for being patient with me with the time. Where is the? I usually ask all our guests this. Do you have social media channels so we can check you out on, or
Yeah,
LinkedIn, or what
LinkedIn.
would be the best place?
Yeah, LinkedIn's the best place. I'm not
Okay.
on a lot of social media for various reasons that we spoke about earlier.
Mm,
You know, I think they do provide utility, but LinkedIn's probably the place to go.
cool.
And you can
Cool.
find all my contact information there. If there's something interesting, feel free to reach out. Uh,
Awesome.
Sounds good.
And thank you, everyone, for listening to the podcast. I want to remind you that the fall narrative and documentary contests are opening soon. So check them out at filmfund.co to submit your entry, and check out our social media channels at the Film Fund on Instagram, at Simply Film Fund on Twitter, Facebook.com/FilmFundCo, and we're also on LinkedIn. just plain old The Film Fund. So check that out for the most up-to-date information. Check out our blog at blog.thefilmfund.co for great filmmaking and producing tips. Sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date on what's happening at the Film Fund. We also have an ebook, The Ultimate Guide to Pre-Production. So if you have no idea where to start, what's a budget, what's a shooting schedule, what's a storyboard, check that out. We'll show you everything you need to know. I want to again thank you everyone for listening or viewing if you're looking at the video feed, and tune in every other Friday for new episodes. Joshua, is there anything else you would like to add?
No, this is great, man. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much. I'll talk to you soon.